I'm wondering how many of you have ever stood in front of a console at a bank or maybe at your own computer and were prompted to give a password to enter into your account. And you just blank on the password, something you've entered maybe 100 times, or maybe it's just one number off. Have you ever been there before? Okay. It's only one number after all, right? But you know what happens? If you're as unlucky as I was recently, you enter it wrong the first time, you get an error message, you think, oh, I just mistyped it. You try to enter the same password the second time, and you know, if it's a bank, sometimes in addition to the error, you also get a warning message that you have one more try before the account will lock you out and you have to go see the service representative, right? Well, 3 strikes and I was out. When Jesus uses the image of the narrow door as a way of talking about our way of gaining access to the kingdom of God, do you think he means it's like a password-protected site where we get one letter or one number off and we're out? I don't think so. I think that's the good news today. The narrow gate can be interpreted in so many different ways. When you have a question these days, what do? You go to Google. So I Googled the narrow gate. And what did I find? I found Catholic and Christian pastors reflecting on the narrow gate in all kinds of ways, but a lot of them interpreted it something like having the secret password. That is, that the condition for our salvation would be something like we either live a very morally pure life, believing in the right formulas, praying the right prayers, following the right rules and the right church, down to the last letter and digit of the password. It sounds a little bit rigorous, doesn't it? Obviously, this line of thinking places a lot of responsibility on us for our salvation. In fact, we nearly have to be perfect, if not perfect. And then on the other side of things, there are interpretations that suggest that since God is all-loving and all-merciful and all-powerful, and we are so small, that really the narrow gate means simply surrendering completely to the love and mercy of God, as if all of my efforts really don't amount to anything. They're worthless in God's eyes. This line of thinking seems to place all of the burden on God's side, that it's not up to us. I think you might see that there's a problem here. This either-or way of thinking, either making salvation all our responsibility or all God's. And it just doesn't strike me that this is what Jesus means by the narrow gate. In the passage from our gospel today, Jesus is on his way to Jerusalem. There's a huge crowd following him. We can only imagine what that must be like. We know how the paparazzi crowd around celebrities these days. Well, Jesus had that same experience. People pressing in just to get close enough even to touch the tassel of his cloak, believing in his saving power to heal. And then there were all these rabble-rousers and folks hanging on to reach him by association, salvation by association. A little bit like having Facebook friends, you're one of a cast of hundreds. That belief that just by association one would be saved. It must have been kind of a spectacle, this crowd, so it's maybe not surprising that someone comes along and says, Lord, are all these to be saved? Jesus' answer is very interesting. He doesn't say how many will be saved. He says, strive to enter through the narrow gate. Many will attempt to enter, but will not succeed. I must admit, I had a funny image come up to me at that point. How many of you know Gannon's ice cream in the valley? Raise your hands. Okay, a lot of you. And I see the smiles out there. You know what I'm talking about. I just discovered Gannon's this summer. It was one of those nights when it was about 90 degrees, humid, and it was about 9:15. The crowd was still pretty big. I had my heart set on a double scoop of chocolate almond fudge ice cream, and I wondered, was I going to make it to the front of that line before they closed? Jesus' image of the narrow gate probably is not like being at Gannon's ice cream at 9:15 at night on a 95-degree evening. But there's something about the image of striving to be there, to be close to him. Our either-or way of thinking, that either it's all us or all God, is not going to help us to reach that narrow gate. Somehow we have to hold this tension a while, this notion of God's loving and merciful nature, his capacity for forgiveness, and this image of striving to enter through the narrow gate. And then we might recall that Jesus himself says, I am the gate. I am the way, the truth, and the life. Enter through me, not as a distant Facebook friend or a member of my entourage or a fair weather fan, and not as one who feels entitled, as many do, that simply by being religious we're in by virtue of being in the right crowd or doing the right rituals the right way. Jesus says, come to me, come to know me, come to love me, come to follow me. It's not a competition to get to the front of a line, but he is saying struggle against our tendency to take him for granted. Jesus is saying, reflect on my words, ponder my actions, understand who I am. Find me in the unlikely faces and surprising places when you pay attention to the people around you, especially the poor. Discipline yourself to be quiet every once in a while, and in the stillness of your heart, hear me whispering, you are my beloved. And in the practice of opening yourself to his love and making a relationship with him your priority, Jesus is saying, discover me loving the world in and through you, I in you and you in me. Jesus is also challenging us to transcend our narrow thinking as we approach the narrow door. Transcend our black and white way of looking at things. Transcend our either-or way of thinking. Instead, to appreciate both the beauty and the infinite capacity of God's love and the importance of our working every day to come closer. To stretch from either-or to both and. And one last point that's distinct but I think related. You know, when as Catholics we espouse that Jesus is the way, the truth, and the life, our narrow gate, if we approach that with an either-or way of thinking, we might also assume that there is no way but Jesus' way or the highway, so to speak. That then what happens to all those who believe other beliefs, other religious faiths? In the spirit of the first reading and in Jesus' own words, we Catholics believe that God's grace works across the boundaries of our religious traditions and in other faiths as well. That Jesus is the way, the truth, and the life, and God's grace is not limited by the boundaries of creed or color or nationality, and we must strive together to enter the kingdom. Very briefly, I don't know if you've been following the controversy about building the mosque near the site of the former World Trade Center, but it has not brought the best out of us as an American people. I want to read to you very briefly from a passage in Vatican II, Nostra Aetate, about our relationship with Muslims. The Church has also a high regard for the Muslims. They worship God, who is one, living and subsistent, merciful and almighty, the Creator of heaven and earth, who has also spoken to men and women. They strive to submit themselves without reserve to the hidden decrees of God, just as Abraham submitted himself to God's plan, to whose faith Muslims eagerly link their own. Although not acknowledging him as God, they venerate Jesus as a prophet. His Virgin Mother they also honor, and even at times devoutly invoke. Further, they await the day of judgment and the reward of God following the resurrection of the dead. For this reason, they highly esteem an upright life and worship God, especially by way of prayer, almsgiving, and fasting. Over the centuries, many quarrels and dissensions have arisen between Christians and Muslims. This sacred council now pleads with all to forget the past and urges that a sincere effort be made to achieve mutual understanding for the benefit of all men and women. Let them preserve together and promote peace, liberty, social justice, and moral values. My brothers and sisters, the new wineskin, I think, involves us setting aside our old way of seeing and believing, that either-or way of looking at the world, and adopting Jesus' way, this both-and way. And the great challenges of our time, the ecological crisis alone, requires that we work across religious boundaries together, and so to make the world a more just, peaceful, and sustainable place. Let us see all as our brothers and sisters.